Hello, everyone. The fallout from Russia-US meeting in Saudi Arabia and Trump's remarks basically getting everything wrong about the war in Ukraine continues. I am glad to see that there are at least some leaders out there who, while still reeling in shock, are already regrouping and trying to propose some practical things that might be of benefit. Whether those things will come to pass is a question, but I'm glad somebody is at least thinking in that direction. First of all, in the typical Trump administration fashion, Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance both snapped back at Zelensky for basically fact-checking them, saying that Zelensky was bad-mouthing Trump. Honey, pointing out that you're lying is not bad-mouthing. It's just pointing out that you're lying. And, there were the usual accusations straight from the Russian and MAGA playbook. It's kind of hard to tell one from the other. That Zelensky misused the appropriated funds, that he had taken advantage of the U.S. administration, blah, blah, blah. And Zelensky is right when he says that Trump basically is drinking, eating, breathing, and sleeping disinformation. So multiple sources have fact-checked Trump since then. Sources I shared yesterday, both BBC and The Guardian had excellent fact-checking articles. And people told me, I said, the people who need to read this, like MAGA hats, are not going to read this. And I basically said, you know what? I'm sharing this at this point with anyone who cares. Anyone at all. I know I will probably not change any minds, but that's okay. I at least want people who care to have sources that they can go to, since US media had sold out. Several US lawmakers have spoken out against Trump's berating of Ukraine and dealing basically a grave insult to the people of Ukraine. And not all of them were Democrats. So, my question to you, lawmakers, is if you understand that he's lying and if you're understanding the global implications of this, why don't you do something? U.S. Congress, it's your job to keep the tabs on the president. So this is gonna land us not only in the domestic crisis, we already are there, but in the international crisis. This is gonna isolate U.S. from all of its allies. Meanwhile, need I remind you that Russia has been discussing taking back Alaska since 2022, and the most recent conversation about this had occurred in the Russian parliament in January of 2025. That's out there. Do you want to be isolated from your allies when that comes up? Because, mark my words, if you do not resist Putin now, this will come up. Associated Press, one of the couple of U.S. sources I still trust, talks about the timeline of the Ukraine war and is pointing out, and we know this, that because of more resources and just more bodies to throw at the front lines, Russia does have advantage. And as long as Ukraine is left alone to fight this war, this is a very tough situation for Ukrainian people to be in. There is a really good overview of the entire 3-year course of the war if you need a reminder of what happened when, including a map like this one and a full timeline. And the usual, Russian talking points about why they did it. I once again would like to remind everybody that at the time Russian tanks rolled over Ukrainian borders, not a single shot has been fired at Russia. There were no foreign troops present and poised to attack Russia. And there was no declaration of war. There was no warning, no attempts to negotiate, nothing. Zelensky had already acknowledged that it's possible that we may not recover all of the lost territory. But the biggest consternation among everyone involved, other than US and Russia, is why are we handing everything to Russia? And I'd like to remind you once again that during a recent interview, Pete Hegseth was repeatedly asked, what will Russia be sacrificing as the result of it? We know what they want Ukraine to sacrifice: 1/5 of its territory, the independence to determine its own future, and so on and so forth. What will Russia be sacrificing? And he did not have an answer. And, Trump basically says, well, since Russia is in a superior position, then Russia should be given whatever the fuck they want. What kind of argument is that? You know who else was in a superior position? Once? No, I'm not going to say Hitler in 1941. No. King George in 1776. You know what happened? The colonies fought. Not only that, the colonies engaged foreign aid, namely the French. And that's how they won the Revolutionary War. Isn't that fucking ironic? One of the things that folks are missing is that, on one hand, Trump wants to hand 1/5 of Ukraine to Russia. On the other hand, he already said he's not going to enforce any of this. So he wants to hand 1/5 of Ukraine over to Russia and then leave Europe to deal with all of this. This is cute. This is Kyiv Independent. Thank you, Kyiv Independent. That brought me a smile. And Elections in Ukraine, a guide for beginners and US presidents. Read this. I mean, I encourage you to read it for your own education, but, it's kind of nice. This is Ukraine being Ukraine, remaining defiant in the face of incredible odds. But also there is useful information here about how Ukrainian elections work, why we haven't had an election. It's all broken down here for you, talking about the references to Ukrainian constitution and so on and so forth, and why Trump is an idiot. And this is what I wanted to talk about, for everyone who is feeling discouraged and desperate. Trust me, I feel that way too. I have parents in Ukraine, and because I'm not a wealthy multi-billionaire, I don't have a private jet and a security detail to get them out. So I am encouraged by pieces like this one, talking about Lithuania's president's 6-point plan to support Ukraine. In addition to security guarantees and leaving NATO membership on the table for Ukraine, he mentioned something very, very important. Something a lot of people have been asking about, namely the funds. There is still 300 billion of Russian frozen funds sitting in Europe, of which $198 billion is held in the Euroclear depository in Belgium. That money can be used to support Ukraine without putting a tax burden on anybody. That is a really good idea. I want to finish with this human interest story. This is on Kyiv Independent website, talking about the British volunteer who helped evacuate Ukrainian civilians. It is a big article. It talks about his story, how he was injured. He lost an arm and a leg while running this operation. He pointed out that one thing that's missing in the West is empathy, something that is aplenty in Ukraine. Slava Ukraini!